quite well, but also this kind of predates the iPhone generation. So back in the 90s, what things changed, and then also like I promised a bit of Xbox Series X for next gen ray tracing kind of landscape. So I took some screenshots and added those in of what the future might look like. But at the same time, I also wanted to give you this kind of contrast of resources to go out and look at as well. So try to make it a bit more interesting, show you the results as well as a bit of fun. So as some reference points, I thought I'd include some podcasts on each one of the charts. So Lavina spoke in a podcast featuring about a week ago from Deloitte, who's got a lot of experience in different domains. We talked about those different domains. We also had a call with Test Rigger, who one of our gold sponsors today, and Paul Grossman about, again, testing some of these different types of technologies and some of the shortfalls and some of the challenges. But I also, like I said, I wanted to take a step back and break these up a little bit, and also add some of my kind of what my big predictions are for going forwards as far as trends. So again, a bit of fun back on my digital camera days in the late 90s. Again, you can see that's just outside of Buckingham Palace, and I covered kind of AR, I guess, augmented reality. So we talked about augmented reality for the Pokemon Go, the new iPhone 12 Max. Obviously, it's got built-in LiDAR, which gives you the ability to kind of like radar, but for augmented reality kind of applications. So you can get kind of the depth of field, shall we say, so you can overlay things like augmentation quite quickly. And I guess this technology is going to be moved into things like the Apple eyeglasses. So, what was Google Glasses, I guess, back in the day, which hopefully you'll get a sneak preview of. They'll be bringing that kind of technology out. So there'll be a lot more of blending augmentation with the real world. And I also kind of talked about this really with a couple of weeks ago with my friend Iran. We talked about things like Car2X, autonomous cars, the idea of AR, VR applications. So I kind of wanted to kind of cover that in there as well, but also which kind of categories of technology. So we kind of looked at, obviously surveyed a whole stack of different technology, but some of that may be applicable to some people and less applicable to others. So I wanted to kind of give a good mix. So we've got things like product and requirements management, or PPM tools. We've got things like ALM tools. We've got your functional testing tools, your performance tools, security testing, release management, DevOps kind of landscape. So I kind of wanted to talk about all of those. And I'll also add in Tatiana, who was, actually referred to herself as the queen of testing, and obviously we've just gone past Buckingham Palace. So, so there's some of the categories spread across. And like I mentioned, like the first generation Google Glasses. So, there's a picture of me, and well, we were at an event at King's College around a company what we'd formed called Test Automation as a Service, TAS.net. And back then we were experimenting, I think about 12 years ago, around automation in the cloud across all sorts of really interesting technology. And I guess we've seen things mature and tools move into that SaaS kind of space since. But part of the failure of the Google Glasses was the application, but it was also around things like privacy, and I think privacy was a challenge. There's obviously some of the use cases what BA and a few other ones had, which kind of came to the demise that maybe we weren't quite ready for this technology. But of course, I covered the concept of the singularity and kind of the predictions, I suppose, that Alan Turing made, which we've celebrated another anniversary of that material this year. And that's not something new, but I guess people are concerned about potentially them losing their jobs to AI, and I don't think that's the case, and we'll kind of cover that as we go through. But I do this idea, exploring this idea of a single source of truth, something we've been trying for a long time, and I think again is something that is still a long way away, because no one, like we mentioned, no tool to rule them all. And I think this goes up a level that most people aren't really that familiar with, which always kind of concerned me. Was, we're all more than happy to utilize tools like Jira or ALM for our own, and as far as we're concerned, they're the central location of truth. but only to us in our context, in our domain. They're not for the entire organization. And that spreads across so many different platforms. And when I talk about project and portfolio management, so think of, if you look at something like, say, if you look at the portfolio level, that's kind of budget. That links your budget into resourcing and people, and not just, story points and tasks. That only gives you a certain view. Part of it is organized from an organizational wide position. They've got to understand, well, what is, if we turn the tap on a little bit more here, what do we get out of it here as far as value? So, value stream mapping, value driven delivery. And obviously at the start of this year, there was kind of some big commitments from the analyst community like Gartner saying there'll be no more IT projects, which I love the idea of, the idea of product over projects, again, a fantastic idea, where we focus on a product, not a transformation or a project, funding a number of projects. So I think things have changed. I'm hoping they're going to change for the good. And it was interesting, I did this session with Neil, and Neil kind of talked about, measuring quality. How do you, talk about time to quality? How do you see when that's changing? And that may be across a number of different products. People might be using Jira, people might be using spreadsheets, they may be using Azure DevOps. There's data in all of those systems, and being able to get that data out and do something with it. Obviously, what we're seeing in the predictive analytics space for AI ops, right? We're going to start seeing that same kind of AI, ALM, PPM kind of landscape of not agile project management, but scaled agile, and how that really starts coming in from a KPI perspective as well, or a cascading KPI perspective. So again, great talk there, a great talk from Adrian as well around this. So go and check those out. I also tried to play a bit of words here. It may have been slightly lost, but bank. This is the Bank of England, and so I kind of wanted to kind of put, well, also banking on getting the right data. I always kind of was concerned a little bit about this kind of large organizations that kind of started off with everything just green, and then suddenly the status goes red very quickly, and there's no forewarning to that. And it's very much like that in the banking industry. I've worked for some of these large investment banks. I mentioned Lehman's and people like Deutsche Bank and stuff, and I think this is the challenge is how do you prove that you're getting the right data, the right metrics, what means the right thing to the right person. And yeah, I love the fact that they in the future they're talking about automation and really kind of the lack of interaction with people for this, and I call out Nero.ai and a few other ones that are starting to bring AI into this ALM space. So I think project level, the landscape is also really important. And yes, some of these numbers kind of really surprised me in the sense of things like the Atlassian market, and how relatively less of interested compared to some of the other tools, and maybe some of the heritage tools like your Borland tools and your Microsoft tools and version 1. There's so much that people are using now. It all depends on the type of organization and the organization culture there. And this always referred me back kind of to Damien, kind of what Damien's saying, do we need better people really than processes and tooling, and I tend to agree. I think it is a cultural thing, but as Dave Snowden really recently kind of tweeted, he said, and he's speaking tomorrow, actually culture sometimes just used as an excuse for lack of structure or process or organization. So I think there is a balance there, and obviously I'll try and bring that in. And then Joe we're talking about kind of how Israel's kind of matured from those kind of early test director days and Mercury days to where we are today. I remember Test Director, which was just a large spreadsheet kind of interface before it became a standalone product, and then a web product, and then what we know today after the QC, ALM landscape, and now Octane. But you can see how things are starting to play out in that landscape. So I kind of really wanted to talk about, well, it's bridging this chasm, and obviously referring straight to the buck in that landscape from Geoffrey Moore is kind of well, there's these kind of early adopters, laggards. There's different cycles within your actual product life cycle as well. And I love the concept around product engineering and bringing those two disciplines together. But I still think there is a bridge between there which we've maybe not covered with the tools. We had this concept around UX that kind of disappeared a few years ago. No one seemed to be that interested. But how do you facilitate product management into those tooling, not just story points and even the idea of which business value kind of points. It just seems like they've been lost. And then on the other side of it, I guess as part of this kind of unbreakable pipeline is this kind of concept to even to a point of saying fully autonomous, is how do you make sure it can self-heal, it can come back and fail forward, fail backwards, whatever you want to call it. And I think again we've got some challenges there. And I kind of like this photo from the Olympics. You can see the Olympic sign on the back. With Ray Arel, who's part of the Agile Alliance and a good friend. He's kind of he does a podcast series which I'd highly recommend there as well. And part of those kind of how do you get to enterprise scale? Kind of the things that he did at Intel really. So I think there's a lot to go on, again, from kind of the project side of things, which we've kind of covered, and now moving into this kind of DevOps landscape and automation. And of course, that's easy for us to start kind of going through in a bit more detail. And so again, I did a session with Hugh, and slightly missing the Curiosity software for the 7% on the left hand side there, but again, it's this kind of landscape of, well, how are we using those tools? And this kind of, one of the things we tried to do when we had Agile Requirements Designer was kind of, well, say that actually we don't mind what tool, adapter, or technology using. So if it's UFT, great. If it's Eggplant, great. Smart Bear, Transcendence, RanaX, we just integrate with everything. It's the easiest way, even to the Microsoft stacks, which obviously are kind of end of life now, things like Coded UI. But then you've got things like Power Automate coming in from the RPA landscape. So I guess part of this kind of battle kind of lands into, well, which ones are now RPA or BPA, business process automation, which I'm speaking at 2 RPA events this week, which is going to be challenging. But part of it is bridging that chasm between the business and what the business can utilize automation for, the operational orchestration that can happen in your OO tools, and really what that looks like from an ops side of things, and then your test automation tools. And a long time ago, maybe 10 years ago, and I've been doing automation for 25 years now, I kind of stopped calling it test automation because my viewpoint was it was automation. It didn't have a particular purpose of the software development lifecycle. It should be applicable everywhere. And some of these vendors you can see here have come from the right hand side and kind of grown up and matured or focused at this area. I also think we've probably been derailed a little bit by things like the Selenium W3C standard and stuff. I love the idea of standards, and that's why I'm so passionate about being on the ISO committee and working with those guys. But at the same time, Selenium is a one-trick pony. It just works with web. It's not desktop. It's not enterprise products that you wouldn't use it for API testing. And I think part of web has its place, but all of these products have their strengths and weaknesses. And so I think that's really important. And I won't go into too much more detail on that. But I have, like I said, from an analyst perspective, I've been on lots of surveys and lots of questionnaires, and of my own, where they keep on asking me these kind of questions. They would say, "Well, what's the best for API testing? What's the best for test management?" And there is a plethora of tools, and I think it's very difficult to kind of say, well, it's just one tool or another. I think it is a blend based on the tools, and some of those are open source, yes, and some of those are enterprise grade. And I think the time to value can change based on whether or not you pay for it. So there's no such thing as free, because as soon as you invest a person, ops dev, ops driven tool development, the idea that someone asked me the other day, well, when do you define non-functional requirements? And I kind of came back to this kind of the Tom Guild landscape of requirements engineering, and how do we do it from an engineering perspective? And then I was kind of saying, well, actually, that changes as well. It changes based on information. It's Black Friday, our non-functional requirements are completely different to what it would be on a normal day or a month end versus something else. And that's, again, informed based on what we're seeing a change. Lockdown, more people using devices, more concurrency. It changes. It all depends on what happened last week, what we're predicting this week's going to look like. And then there's also an operational challenge around, well, what does that mean as far as scale? Do you really need extra capacity? Is it really scalable? And then I guess the landscape then moves into this chaos engineering landscape of, well, how do you prove that it can deal with those kind of issues? So systemic failure, what happens on a Black Friday or a PS5 release, which I documented just how badly this year these things have happened. And I'm disappointed that we think we can just move things to the cloud and get scalability out of them, and we're not really proving, well, what happens when this goes down, or PayPal goes down, or the DNS has an issue, or whatever it may be, right? Or your CDNs. Tests should exist in the code, right? It should be testing itself when it's running at runtime, right? It should be kind of saying, well, I'm seeing something weird happening, whether that's a build up of or some kind of error that's starting to come through, and I can make a decision at runtime what I do with that, whether or not I run a number of tests to work out if this behavior carries on, what's going to happen. I spin off to a separate AB kind of landscape or canary kind of, say, to continue an experiment to see what my end state will be, and then switch back. This concept around digital twin and being able to do experiments. I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of that, and I think this is why infrastructure as code was, and terraforming and Puppet and Chef and stuff appeared, allowed us to do more controlled experiments. But those experiments maybe aren't the end customer isn't the right person to do, so they should be in production environment. And it's what we're doing with MIT at the moment with the contact tracing is, there's a blend between this kind of dark launching of new functionality, but over to a subset of people who are validating it, and we're getting track records, we're getting telemetry out of there, and then we're kind of making a decision whether we roll that out from a canary to real users, not just test users or VIPs or a certain subset of people that we're happy to expose those kind of functionality to. So it is more complex than I think we've talked about in the past, and hopefully we'll see a lot more going forwards in the future. And I guess this reiterates this kind of this conversation around engineering performance, or performance engineering, or any engineering. I'm going to use the word solution engineering, whatever you want to call it. I just feel like we've lost those engineering practices, and we've kind of done that. We've kind of gone towards more kind of speed and agility, and that's great. I get it. You want to be able to get something out quickly, but once it's out, don't you want to have the best quality product you can do? So aren't you engineering product excellence? Isn't that kind of what we're trying to do? So a shout out again to Todd DiCaprio around effectiveperformanceengineering.com and the book that he wrote for O'Reilly to really kind of understand some of those fundamentals. And again, during lockdown, I've done a lot with the Performance Advisory Council around improving performance. And this is one of my kind of areas that I really enjoy doing at the moment and helping organizations with when it comes to automation, performance, and security. And again, this landscape has been dominated really by load runner. I started off with load runner, or even Astra load test back before the acquisition from Astra to Mercury. And I've always loved the concept of kind of how important performance engineering is, and I know this year they've released Load Runner Developer with this kind of concept of shifting left earlier into the software development life cycle, which is something I've never really been a massive fan of, based on the fact that I don't know if it fixes the problem just passing it towards a different type of skill set, a bit more coding developer focused. I actually think it's great when it comes to covering all of the different segments of the life cycle. So performance center, for instance, now load runner cloud, this ability to provide visibility to the organization, incredibly important. Load runner enterprise, now called the original load runner, now being an enterprise grade tool that's used for specific performance engineering activities, whether that's post deployment as far as operational or actually in the development lifecycle. So I love the idea of that there's different phases and different types of tools for each type of those kind of maturities or phase of development. But I think again there's still certain aspects that we're missing. I am incredibly saddened by Microsoft going end of life with their load tool, which I've always loved, and I remember speaking with the guys at Microsoft when they were in development of this many years ago, and they never really cared too much about the testing landscape, and I found that as a real shame. And again, we've seen industries kind of grow out and focus again on open source, and JMeter. I guess eventually JMeter will become a kind of a W3C. And I remember, spending a lot of time with Alon, who was one of the second biggest contributor to JMeter, and really that's where spun out the BlazeMeter kind of capability, which is now Broadcom. And it was built on Taurus, and I love Taurus, and I use it all the time, and I kind of I like this idea that actually one's just a load agent, and one's you've got really mature products like the Micro Focus Load Runner, which is more controller based, and Neotis and things like that, where you don't really care where your injection's coming from, and that therefore a BlazeMeter ability to inject geo-based load from different locations is great. In-house, it's also really important to be able to do those injection if that's you're testing within your own environment for something like government, and again is really important. And I love the stuff things like Neotis are doing with Dynatrace and Splunk and stuff like that, where they're shifting right, which is my viewpoint. But that again is nothing new. The PAL tools and stuff I've been talking to Wilson Marwer for many years about is this performance application lifecycle, pulling the stuff from the right and then modeling it on the left. Again, you're seeing things like Eggplant, you doing that with digital twins and telemetry information coming from their monitoring and operational tools. So there's so much going on in performance and in automation space to look at, not to kind of be scared of dabbling in. So yeah, I got some great stuff from Mike around Kafka and dealing with kind of these knowledge graphs. How do you do your performance when it comes to GraphQLs, and taking a huge amount of data from different sources. There's so many new next generation challenges, and Rory talks about some of those as well. But I guess as kind of a final kind of note, as we're kind of coming into close, is that my viewpoint is that, and especially as kind of what I covered in the TED talk, was that actually it is transcendence. It's our digital transcendence. It's how much of ourselves we're wanting to train into these systems. What are we trying to do? We're trying to accelerate some of the digital grind, some of those activities we should really not be using our brain for, and then really using our brain to do those complex problem solving, which is what we're here for. And to me, that's human augmentation. And I think part of that is we've got to train these systems, and we're hopefully training them for activities that don't need to be done by humans anymore. And then we can focus on the complex stuff. And so I think modeling is one of those things that I think you're going to have to think about, and that's why model-based testing, model-based performance, model-based data or data engineering is really important. And then, of course, it wouldn't be a presentation without including the RPA landscape, which again has boomed out there. And you've got your big players at the top, your UiPath, your Blue Prisms of the world, and Automation Anywhere, again, coming from the left side, Automation Anywhere. And then you've got new tools like Micro Focus, right? And I was really excited when Micro Focus announced they're bringing UFT and OO together to create a tool, an RPA tool, because part of it is you've already invested in those OO tools, those orchestration tools. So you've already written the recipes, and you want to be able to leverage those to power your RPA solutions. And I think this is where suddenly we're going to start seeing some interesting players. We'll see Microsoft with their maybe enter at a lower level with Power Automate. You're going to start seeing people like IBM who have those operational capabilities starting to come into this market. So some really interesting landscapes here. So watch this space, and I think I'd be advising automation engineers to be looking at both sides, look at the business side of things, and not just focus on testing, focus on automation for where automation adds the most value. So this brings us on to kind of my favorite part, really, which is the operational landscape and monitoring in ops, and how to kind of take all that really useful information and inform the left hand side. And I guess, an example for this year for NHS XApp, that maybe overstepped the boundaries a little bit around privacy. So, we did, when they did a rollout to a trial location in the UK, the Isle of Wight, they still had things like Firebase giving analytics around people's, data and what they were doing. And of course, that was run by G6Q and powered by some of their technology. So, there was this kind of privacy by design challenge which we had at MIT to make sure that it was open source, people could see that we weren't taking in data from the phone, but that also makes it really difficult, because if you're not taking data from user behavior and using that analytic data to inform the left hand side, then you're kind of sailing blind. And this is where I was working with Splunk for Good and Todd around this kind of machine driven insight. So using the data based on machine usage to kind of derive those telemetry data that you would normally have on your phone to kind of understand people are, in a certain location, or they're doing certain activities. So, I think we need this right hand side, and we also need the kind of the support from the right hand side to inform the left. And we know about this from an operational perspective, and there's some great tools out there that people, things like the SMAX landscape, right, where they're starting, even Max, their AI assistant, is starting to help you with those standard tasks with my Outlook's sizes or a database needs to be increased, stuff like that just should happen, right? So I think it's really important to take these things into consideration about operational support and support in the real world. A great podcast there from Mike and also Lewis from Doing Cancer Research UK about how you actually do that. And so I guess that kind of brings us to the end of the state of tooling, and kind of talks about bridging that gap between the real world and the future, and what that future might look like, and how we potentially make an impact on that. So at the end of the survey, we kind of said, okay, go out, what would you recommend as the next big things that you'd be interested in from a trends perspective? And I'm definitely seeing some of these, and I want to just kind of offer up for those people who are watching, how do you go out and get more information about this? And of course, you've seen all the way through this presentation the QAlead.com podcast. You've seen the podcast what I've been doing with Vivit for Espresso Talks, where there's a whole plethora of people that I've interviewed and talked to over this year, and part of my bubble, I suppose, that actually, you can go and find more information about each one of these kind of landscapes. So again, some interesting numbers here. Mainframe in the cloud, you're never going to lose COBOL, it's always going to be there, and I think that's an interesting one. RPA, or kind of what I would class as intelligent robotic process automation, which I'm speaking at a number of events this week about. Intelligent operations, I love the AI tools. Dimensional transactional data, again, really useful. I think we're going to see some really interesting stuff coming there. Smart test execution, AI use to select which tests should be run. I get that. I like the idea with when it's connected to the code base, and it's definitely connected to the runtime landscape, and then mapping those both. I've seen a few tools starting to move into that landscape. Low code, of course, not just for automation, for everything. You're going to start seeing tools like Microsoft, which are focused on low code. And I guess this is just another level of abstraction that we're doing, and we've got now that we can do more NLP, and NLP is a lot easier to do. So you can talk to your VPA, your virtual personal assistant, or your machine to get them to do more work. So lots of trends to still see and be really excited about for the next few years. So again, if you want to learn more, reach out. I'm very easy to get to. You can see that Jonathan_Wright from Twitter, but also if you go onto LinkedIn, it's linkedin.com/in/automation, one word, nice and easy to get as a username. So reach out to me, and I'm more than happy to help. And on that bombshell, we're going over into the live prize draws and obviously the panel discussion. So I'm going to invite Iran and the rest of the panel members to join me. I'm going to also, oh, there's Lavina. Hey, Lavina. I've realized that my sessions overran slightly, but I kind of tried to include questions in there so we could be more kind of thought-provoking on kind of what we've seen for today and what we can look forward to. So welcome, Bob. Welcome, Iran, all the way from Boston. Welcome.